My grandmother always used to tell me that if you see someone in trouble, you should help them out, because the happiness you give to others will inevitably come back to you one day. Even when she was bedridden, she'd try to wave me off to go play outside, but I was the kind of kid who insisted on staying back to help her. Those lessons truly stayed with me as I grew up, leading me to eventually join my high school's health committee. But taking care of my classmates took a bizarre turn when I ended up being assigned to help an actual undead girl. Her name is Tsukuyomi Sana, and before the summer break, she was living a completely normal life as the refined, flawless daughter of the renowned Tsukuyomi family. She had the looks, the brains, the athletic ability, and impeccable manners. She was a beautiful lady who was perfect in absolutely every aspect. But when the new semester started, our teacher dropped a massive bombshell on the class, explaining that a lot of things had happened over the summer, and Sana had unfortunately died, only to return to school as a literal zombie. Covered in stitches and bandages, she stood before our shocked, whispering classmates and calmly explained that she wasn't some scary monster straight out of a video game. She assured us that she wouldn't attack or bite anyone, revealing that the paper talisman stuck to her forehead possessed spiritual power that bound her soul to her body, supplying it with life energy. She casually told everyone not to worry and to just treat her transformation as a little image change so she could live a normal school life just like she always had. While her extreme summer debut was surprising, the class was relieved to see she was still the same cool, pretty girl. But that illusion shattered the moment the teacher told her to return to her seat, and she began lumbering down the aisle with incredibly stiff, loud, and creaking mechanical steps. Realizing she couldn't move her body properly anymore, the teacher immediately assigned me, Hiyoshi, to help her out due to my role on the health committee, which brings us to today. As I sit next to this Frankenstein-esque girl who is accidentally snapping her mechanical pencils in half, I try to convince myself that it's wrong to think she's scary, even if her sudden, jerky head movements give me a fright. When she catches me staring, she gets a bit defensive, coldly telling me that since she's obviously a monster now, I don't need to push myself to help her. She proudly declares that she will show me she can handle everything perfectly on her own, trying her hardest to maintain her past image of a flawless genius. I want to believe she doesn't need my help, but right at that moment, the teacher asks the class a question. Sana attempts to raise her hand to answer, only for her entire arm to violently snap completely backward at the elbow with a sickening creak. As I stare in absolute horror and ask if something is wrong with her arm, she begins sweating profusely and stammers out a pathetic excuse, frantically claiming she hasn't lost control of her body, but rather, she just has a bizarre new hobby of showing off the back of her hand to people. Yeah, right, like I'm going to believe that's just a strange hobby. I see right through her tough act, realizing there's a bit of truth to her struggle, and gently point out that it's probably just rigor mortis preventing her from moving properly, begging her to drop the bizarre excuses. But her pride simply won't let her back down. Insisting that it would be shameful to rely on someone else, she grabs her busted limb with her good hand, muttering that if she just supports it, she can do this on her own. With a violent shove, she forces both of her completely stiff arms straight out in front of her, inadvertently striking the exact, stereotypical pose of a hopping Chinese Jiangxi zombie. I watch in pure panic as she stands completely frozen in that absurd on-the-nose pose, but as she begins to tremble, I notice her face turning bright red with humiliation, and I can't help but realize just how ridiculously cute she is when she's embarrassed. Seeing her trying so incredibly hard but failing miserably, I decide I can't just leave her hanging like that. Shouting for her to excuse me, I abruptly stand up, step behind her desk, grab her stiff arm, and manually hoist it high into the air, loudly announcing to the teacher that Tsukuyomi is raising her hand. She stammers in sheer panic, begging me to stop, but I proudly whisper to her that we did it. Realizing there's no turning back now, she steels her resolve, telling herself she has to pull it together and give the perfect response. With absolute, unwavering confidence, she declares the complex mathematical answer to the class, only for the teacher to bluntly inform her that we had already moved past that problem. The entire room falls totally silent as her confident facade crumbles into trembling, wide-eyed mortification. Later, after the bell rings, I sit beside her and apologize for embarrassing her, admitting I just couldn't watch her struggle without stepping in. Refusing to accept defeat, she immediately delivers an incredibly desperate excuse, claiming she didn't actually make a mistake, but was simply answering the previous question to remind the class about the importance of reviewing their studies. Her quick ability to adapt her lies makes me laugh, and I admit to her that I think I'm completely over my initial fear. She points out that I'm a really nice person for helping her, even when I was terrified, but I confess that before all this, I always thought the cool, perfect genius Tsukuyomi was completely unapproachable. However, seeing her work so hard today, witnessing her stubborn pride, and watching her get so flustered, has actually made her feel wonderfully human and easy to talk to. Smiling warmly, I ask if she'd mind letting me help her out from now on. Stunned by my honesty, she immediately whips her head away to hide her face, stubbornly reiterating that she can handle everything with her new body, but quietly admits that if I really insist, she supposes it's fine. I happily agree to strongly insist, but as we continue talking, I notice she hasn't turned her head back around. I ask her why she's still facing the back of the classroom, wondering out loud if her neck has completely locked up in that weird position. Blushing furiously with her head stubbornly stuck looking over her shoulder, she desperately tries to save face one last time, nervously claiming that her newest hobby is simply staring at the floor diagonally behind her, an excuse so utterly ridiculous I can only yell out in pure exasperation at her bizarre undead habits. Helping Tsukuyomi-sana adapt to her new undead life was proving to be a massive challenge, especially since my role on the health committee meant I had to assist her with even the most basic everyday actions. After the sheer struggle of just raising her hand in class, the bell rang, signaling that our next period was chemistry, which unfortunately meant we had to navigate the ultimate boss for a stiff-jointed zombie, the school stairs. As we stood at the bottom of the towering staircase, Sana's fierce pride flared up once again, declaring that, as a daughter of the esteemed Tsukuyomi family, she would demonstrate how to ascend with flawless grace and elegance, strictly forbidding me from offering any physical support. Taking a massive, terrifyingly stiff stride that skipped multiple steps at once, she somehow managed to lumber her way to the top landing, striking a triumphant pose and asking how she did. I enthusiastically praised her performance to keep her spirits up, even though I privately thought her wild leaping method was anything but graceful. As she happily commanded us to continue, I decided to walk closely behind her, just in case she tripped, but within seconds, my eyes bugged out of my skull as the steep angle and her short skirt provided a very dangerous view of her stitched-up thighs. Flustered and mentally screaming at myself that it was completely wrong to have weird thoughts while she was trying her hardest, I decided I really did need to adopt her fake hobby of staring diagonally at the floor, only to immediately trip and faceplant onto the steps, muttering to a confused Sana that I was just fighting my own inner demons. Thankfully, we made it to chemistry, and I started to think I was just being overprotective, but my relief vanished when class ended, and I found Sana frozen at the top of the stairwell. Trembling in absolute terror, it hit me then that going downstairs with unbending knees was infinitely harder than going up. I urgently offered to carry her, warning that if she tried to take her reckless, stiff-legged strides, she would definitely fall, but she stubbornly refused, arguing that being carried by a boy would be the ultimate humiliation. Refusing to swallow her pride, she formulated a crazy plan to bypass the slow, risky process of descending step by step, ordering me to wait at the bottom so she could clear the entire staircase in one go. Despite my panicked protests that a jump was even more dangerous, she proudly reminded me that she had won the National Gymnastics Championship back when she was alive, and before I could stop her, she confidently launched herself into the air. I braced myself, fully prepared to get crushed catching her, but to my absolute awe, she utilized her lingering athletic muscle memory to execute a stunningly elegant jump, landing perfectly on her feet. I cheered her success as she flashed a smug, victorious smile, boasting that she had successfully avoided the humiliation of being carried right up until the physics of her landing caused her skirt to violently flip up, putting her floral panties on full display right in front of my face as my brain short-circuited and I desperately stammered out an apology. Sana's face turned a glowing beet red. horrified by the realization that her clumsy attempt to preserve her dignity had resulted in exposing an even greater shame. Her brain completely broke, prompting her to furiously scream out the desperate, tearful excuse that showing off her panties was actually just her newest hobby. I couldn't help but yell back that her excuse just made her sound like a massive pervert, and after that utter disaster of an ego trip, she finally gave up, allowing us to carefully descend the rest of the stairs step by step, resulting in us safely arriving completely late for our next class. When the lunch bell finally rang, I noticed Sana grabbing her bag and heading for the door. Given that she's, well, a literal zombie, though I have to admit, an undead girl with a surprisingly great figure, her leaving the classroom caused a few panicked screams from the other students in the hall. She quickly clarified to the terrified onlookers that she just brought her own lunch and usually eats outside, definitely not to go attack people. Still, watching her stiffly walk away, I couldn't help but worry about her eating all by herself. Even the undead need a lunch break, right? So, I caught up with her and casually asked if I could tag along. Instantly, her eyes lit up with absolute sparkling joy, though she immediately tried to play it off, defensively stammering that it wasn't a problem and wondering why I was reacting to her weirdly. She led me to a quiet spot with benches and tables behind the school, smugly calling it her secret hideout. When I pointed out how genuinely happy she looked and teased that maybe she was just lonely eating by herself all this time, she completely lost her cool. Flailing her stiff arms, she loudly denied it, insisting she actually loved eating alone, but quickly added that since I was just fulfilling my health committee duties, she supposed she could make a special exception and allow me to join her. I just smiled, knowing full well she was thrilled to have some company, but as she opened her lunchbox, I had to ask the burning question: was it filled with raw meat? Sighing, she assured me she wasn't that kind of zombie, instead revealing an incredibly sophisticated traditional Japanese bento, consisting of sushi rice with pickled plum, vinegared side dishes, and green tea. The mood instantly dropped, however, when she gloomily explained that because her body is actually a decaying corpse, she's strictly limited to eating foods with high preservative and antibacterial properties. To make matters worse, I pulled out my lunch, a simple pork sandwich. The moment the word pork left my mouth, her undead instincts completely hijacked her brain. She began intensely staring at my sandwich, a thick line of drool pooling at her mouth as she blankly chanted the word meat over and over like a ravenous ghoul. Sweating, I told her she was really starting to look like a monster, which finally snapped her out of her trance. Clearing her throat, she declared it was time to eat, abruptly pulling out a pair of chopsticks. I was baffled, pointing out that with her unbending rigor mortis joints, there was no way she could use them, and asked if she had a spoon instead. Insulted, she proudly stated she wasn't a child. Her terrible habit of acting tough was back in full force as she bragged about her wealthy family drilling perfect table manners into her since childhood, even claiming she held a world record for rapidly transferring red beans from plate to plate. But reality hit hard the second she actually tried to pick up her food. Her mechanical, trembling hands absolutely crushed her lunch, sending rice flying everywhere. Defeated and shaking with frustration, she glared at her hands, wondering what the hell chopsticks even were. In a desperate bid to save face, she claimed that making a massive mess was actually a refined Tsukuyomi family tradition, an excuse so bad I had to tell her to stop before she ruined her family's reputation. Finally, with glowing, angry eyes, she cursed the ancient Japanese people for inventing chopsticks altogether. Seeing her look like a literal vengeful spirit, I sighed and offered to help her eat. Grumbling that she'd only accept if I really insisted, she sat back, but she was entirely unprepared for what came next. I picked up a piece of her food with my chopsticks, held it up to her mouth, and gave her the classic romantic, "Here, say ah." Her eyes widened in absolute shock, her face instantly erupting into a massive blush as she began frantically waving her stiff arms, panicking that the whole feeding routine was way too intimate for a boy and a girl to be doing. I casually pointed out that while that might be true, if I didn't feed her this way, she literally wouldn't be able to eat anything at all. Sana completely freaked out at my offer to feed her, her stitched face burning bright red as she accused me of talking nonsense. She nervously stuttered that feeding each other like that was something only lovers did, completely misinterpreting my intentions. Baffled by her massive leap in logic, I deadpanned, asking her if she seriously thought we were lovers. That blunt reality check instantly shattered her flustered delusions, and after a moment of heavy silence, she embarrassingly conceded that I was probably right. Reluctantly swallowing the last of her pride, she squeezed her eyes shut and braced herself, signaling for me to go ahead. Taking a deep breath to push past my own sudden awkwardness, I boldly announced, "All right, here it comes." "Ah, Anne," and gently popped the piece of food into her mouth. She accepted it with a cute little mew sound, but the moment the food settled, a suggestive, lingering moan completely escaped her lips. My heart skipped a beat, and my face practically caught fire as I stared at her half-lidded, utterly blissed-out expression, realizing she was heavily blushing too. Frantically trying to recover, I stuttered that I had just gotten a bit nervous, and she immediately went back on the defensive, loudly blaming my weird comments for making the situation so embarrassing. To diffuse the tension, I firmly reminded her that, as a health committee member, it was my absolute duty to help her, since she simply couldn't use chopsticks with her undead joints, declaring that was all there was to it. She fiercely agreed with my logic, and as I picked up a pickled plum to feed her next, I couldn't help but quietly admit to myself that seeing her make that suggestive "on" face made me incredibly self-conscious. However, the moment the sour plum hit her tongue, her face scrunched up into an absolutely hilarious, teary-eyed grimace. Bursting into laughter at her dramatic reaction, I completely forgot all about the awkward tension from a minute ago. She begged me not to laugh, whining that she was actually terrible with pickled plums, and as I playfully teased her for acting like a picky kid while feeding her more rice, the rest of our lunch went perfectly smoothly. In fact, it went so smoothly that the bell suddenly rang, and it wasn't until Sana announced she was finished that I realized I had spent the entire time feeding her and hadn't taken a single bite of my pork sandwich. I quickly assured her I wasn't hungry anyway, but as soon as we got back to class, my stomach let out a thunderous, embarrassing growl that echoed through the quiet room. By the time the final bell rang and we were walking out of the school gates, Sana looked absolutely exhausted. Sighing heavily, she complained that, even though undead supposedly don't get tired, she was completely drained. She formally bowed to me, sincerely apologizing for being such a massive bother and causing so much trouble on my very first day of helping her, admitting she felt especially guilty about my loudly growling stomach. Seeing her look so down, I smiled and reassured her it was no trouble at all. I reminded her of my grandma's motto, that if you see someone in trouble, you have to help them out, and confessed that I actually really enjoyed spending the day with her, boldly asking if we could have lunch together again tomorrow. Startled by my honesty, she paused, a gentle, genuine smile finally breaking through her tough exterior. Blushing softly, she thanked me, sweetly saying she'd be in my care from here on out. Of course, I couldn't just let the moment stay completely wholesome, so I teasingly mimicked her usual stubborn tone, joking that she was probably thinking, "It's unnecessary, but if you really insist." Her sweet smile instantly vanished, replaced by a furious glare as I continued poking the bear, advising her to drop the tough act tomorrow and just bring a spoon and a napkin, since she was guaranteed to make a giant mess again. With a loud, frustrated scream that echoed across the courtyard, she angrily yelled my name, stubbornly declaring that she didn't need my help tomorrow, and that she would prove she could handle everything perfectly, proving that even as an undead, she was still exactly the same prideful, stubborn girl she had always been. The very next morning, I walked to school fully accepting my new role as Tsukuyomi's helper, but as I approached the gate, I was completely caught off guard. There she was, standing stiffly by the entrance, practically glowing with that elegant high-class lady aura. Stunned that a beautiful girl was actually waiting for me at the school gate, I rushed over and asked her why she was there. She warmly replied that she just couldn't wait to see me, a statement that immediately made my heart hammer in my chest. Flustered, I stammered, asking what she meant by that, completely convinced she was confessing something romantic, but my hopes were instantly crushed when she deadpanned, I meant it's about changing my shoes. Yeah, that tracked. As we walked into the bustling entrance hall, I realized the shoe lockers were basically the first major hurdle of the day for an undead girl with rigor mortis. She nervously admitted that her body's stiffness was especially bad in the mornings, but in a surprising show of vulnerability, she pushed past her pride as a daughter of the Tsukuyomi family, quietly confessing that she would allow me to help her to avoid disgracing herself in front of everyone. Thrilled that I had actually managed to earn some of her trust after yesterday, I excitedly pumped my fists, promising to help her with everything I had. She frantically shushed me, begging me not to make a scene since the hall was packed with students. Looking around, I realized the lockers in the far corner were completely empty, likely due to the declining birth rate, meaning fewer classes. I eagerly guided her over, pointing out that not only was it empty, but because all the students had to turn right to get to their classrooms, this specific spot was a perfect visual dead angle where she could change her shoes without any pressure or prying eyes. Impressed, she praised my quick thinking, and I excitedly offered to grab her indoor shoes from her locker. However, as I stood there holding a cute girl's indoor shoes, a sudden, intrusive thought hit me. Wasn't this kind of a sinful thing to do? Like an absolute idiot, I instinctively brought the shoes up to my face and took a deep sniff, only to freeze in pure horror when I realized she was standing right behind me. Her face instantly turned violently red as she angrily yelled that of course she'd mind me smelling her shoes, furiously forbidding me from ever getting near them again. I desperately tried to defend myself, stammering out that they were completely clean and didn't smell at all, but that only made her scream that my gross commentary was entirely unnecessary. Pushing me aside, she stubbornly declared she didn't need my help to take off her outdoor loafers either, lifting her incredibly stiff leg and violently kicking her foot forward. The loafer shot off her foot like a high-speed projectile, rocketing through the air and slamming directly into my face with a sickening thud. As I reeled backward in pain, a panicked Tsukuyomi instantly slapped me across the cheek, bizarrely yelling that I was a pervert. Rubbing my stinging cheek, I angrily pointed out that her accusation made absolutely no sense since I literally just got assaulted by her flying shoe, to which she sheepishly apologized, admitting she just slapped me on reflex out of pure embarrassment. Deciding enough was enough, I knelt down, picked up her indoor shoes, and firmly told her it was time to stop being shy, instructing her to stick her feet in so I could help. She completely deflated, her face glowing red as she quietly whined that she could never be a wife anymore, now that a boy had practically seen her at her most vulnerable. But I just rolled my eyes, reminding her for the 100th time that her shoes smelled perfectly normal anyway, earning me another angry yell to shut up. I knelt down, fully prepared to help her slip into her indoor shoes, but she suddenly panicked, fiercely holding her skirt down and screaming that I absolutely couldn't look her way. Before I could even ask why, she violently kicked her stiff leg upward, completely exposing her stitched-up thighs right before her loafer slammed squarely into my face. I crashed to the floor with a fresh red mark stamped on my cheek, groaning out an apology for messing up, but Sana was already on the warpath. Blushing furiously, she branded me a total pervert, yelling that between yesterday's stare incident and today, I had reached the absolute pinnacle of indecency by peeking at her panties twice. I weakly tried to defend myself, pointing out that yesterday's flash was entirely self-inflicted, but she was already spiraling into her own wild imagination, dramatically declaring that she'd have no choice but to punish me by using me as a human chair. When I loudly questioned what kind of nonsense she was spouting, she nervously realized she had essentially just admitted to having a bizarre S&M fantasy, her face flushing even deeper as she stammered out that she wasn't some kind of sadistic princess. Trying to suppress my laughter at her major slip of the tongue, I teased her for knowing so much about that kind of stuff, which only made her groan in pure embarrassment. Realizing that helping her with her shoes carried a massive, undeniable panty risk, I jokingly suggested that having her sit on my back like a chair actually was the most logical solution, though mentally I panicked at the thought of her butt touching me and hastily suggested using a textbook as a buffer. She shot down my terrible idea immediately, sighing in exasperation and asking if I could just lend her my shoulder like a normal person. Desperately wanting to prove I could actually be of use to her, I readily agreed, standing up so she could lean against me for balance. But the moment she wrapped her arm around my neck and lifted her leg, my brain completely short-circuited. She was way too close, and her scent, an intoxicating mix of floral fragrance and incense, flooded my senses. Frantically trying to clear my mind and act like a disciplined monk so she wouldn't yell at me about smelling her again, I suddenly realized an even bigger problem. Because of our height difference, her massive chest was pressed directly against the side of my face. I internally screamed in panic, begging her to notice that in her attempt to stop me from feeling her butt, she was actively letting me feel her chest instead. Completely oblivious to my suffering, she successfully slipped her shoe on and cheered her victory, turning her head toward me with a bright smile, only to finally realize exactly where her chest was resting. Her eyes bugged out in sheer shock, and with a panicked apology, she violently shoved me away. Stumbling backward, I watched in horror as her sudden, jerky movement threw her entirely off balance. I lunged forward to catch her, yelling for her to look out, but the momentum sent us both crashing into the lockers, with her landing directly on top of me and her chest utterly smothering my face. After a muffled groan and a frantic scramble to get off me, we both stood there, faces burning red. I desperately stammered that it wasn't on purpose and asked if she was okay, but she refused to look at me, her voice totally icy as she quietly apologized and asked me to head to class without her so she could put her outdoor shoes away. Crushed by her incredibly cold tone, I agreed and slowly walked down the empty hallway, lamenting that just when I thought we were getting closer, my repeated, accidental harassment had completely ruined our friendship. I slumped into my desk in the classroom, utterly defeated and feeling like a total failure, completely unaware of what was actually happening back at the lockers. Sana was clutching her chest, blushing madly as she realized she had pushed me away, not out of anger, but because she was terrified, I would hear her heart racing, only to hilariously remember a second later that as a zombie, her heart didn't even beat anymore. To her absolute surprise, as she bent down to grab her shoes, she realized her joints were bending perfectly, wondering if the sheer heat of her embarrassment had literally loosened up her stiff, undead muscles, leaving her secretly impressed by my unintentional, yet incredibly effective health committee methods.